Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
They flew my brother to Paris for his birthday. First class, mind you. Champagne at takeoff, Eiffel Tower selfies within 24 hours, and a fancy caption on Instagram that read, "Best birthday ever, thanks Mom and Dad." Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment on my birthday, same day every year, waiting for a call that didn't come, a text that never buzzed, not even a lousy Facebook post. Just silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that sits in your stomach and doesn't move, like a stone swallowed by mistake. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even pick up the phone. I made a cup of tea, took a deep breath, and did exactly what I'd been thinking about for 2 years now. I logged into my bank account, opened the payment dashboard for my parents' rent, hovered my mouse over the scheduled transaction, and clicked cancel. That was it. That's all it took. One click. No drama. No guilt. Just silence in return for silence. You see, this wasn't a one-off thing. This wasn't a small oversight or a case of oops, we forgot, sweetie. This was the 12th time in a row. 12 birthdays. 12 years. 12 times I sent flowers to my mom on Mother's Day, bought my dad those overpriced whiskey glasses for Father's Day, hosted Thanksgiving in my two-bedroom while Eli couldn't make it back from LA. And 12 times they forgot the one day that was mine. My name is Lena Monroe. I'm 42. I've never been married, I don't have kids, and according to my parents, that means my life is less complicated. Their words. Not mine. I live in Arlington, Virginia. I work in risk management for a consulting firm, and I've been paying my parents rent for the last 9 years because they said their fixed income wasn't enough to cover it. I believed them. I didn't even question it. That's who I've always been: responsible, loyal, dependable Lena. And then there's Eli. 6 years younger. Lives like he's 20. He's the guy who dropped out of college to pursue music but hasn't released a single thing in 5 years. He couch surfs, picks up temp jobs when he feels like it, and somehow, miraculously, always lands on his feet. Because there's always someone there to catch him. Usually me. Sometimes our parents. But mostly me. He's got this way of making everything look effortless, like the world just bends for him a little. People adore him. Women, men, strangers at bars. My parents? They treat him like he's still 11 years old and just scored the winning goal in some imaginary soccer match. Last year, when he got arrested for unpaid parking tickets and had his car impounded, they called me in the middle of the night to bail him out. And I did. Like an idiot, I did. I Venmo'd the money and then sat up for the rest of the night wondering why the hell I couldn't say no. But this year, something in me snapped. I'd gone out of my way to drop hints about my birthday. I wasn't subtle. I brought it up casually 2 weeks before. Mentioned I had no plans. That I was feeling a little low. My mom said, "Oh, that's right, honey, it's around this time, isn't it?" and then changed the subject to Eli's new girlfriend. My dad just nodded like he hadn't heard me at all. Then, 5 days later, I saw Eli's birthday post. "Paris, baby. Merci, fam." I stared at that photo for 5 full minutes. My parents, both grinning, wine in hand, standing next to him in front of the Arc de Triomphe. That grin my mom saves only for Eli. My dad's arms slung around him like they were best friends, not father and son. And I felt something inside me dissolve. Not break, breaks are sharp and fast. This was slower. Like rust eating through metal. So when my birthday came, and the phone stayed quiet all day, I didn't get mad. I didn't scream into a pillow. I didn't call to remind them. I just stopped. I stopped pretending I was okay with being the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who never caused trouble. I stopped paying. That was their last rent payment. August. Done. Do you know what it's like to realize that your parents, your own flesh and blood, treat you like an obligation, while treating your brother like a miracle? Like he's some divine reward for all their hard work, and you're just the practical daughter who can be counted on to do the taxes and pick up their prescriptions? Let me ask you this, and really think about it. How many years of being overlooked does it take before you just opt out? You can't unknow the feeling that your love has been transactional. That the reason they praised you for being so mature and so reliable was because they saw you not as a daughter, but as a safety net. A financial plan. A backup generator they could flip on when things got dark. And when I think back, really think, I realize they stopped seeing me as a child the moment Eli was born. He was the star, and I was the stagehand. Necessary, but invisible. So yeah, it's just a birthday. But it's not. It's a lifetime of them. It's every birthday I pretended didn't hurt. Every phone call I made when they forgot. Every time I told myself they loved me in their own way. Every year I blew out candles alone and lied to Trisha about how I wanted a quiet one this year. It's 12 years of swallowing disappointment like medicine. This year, I didn't swallow it. I let it sit. I looked it in the eye. And I made a choice. They still don't know. Not yet. The rent won't be due again for 3 weeks. But when it is, they'll feel it. For the first time in decades, they'll feel what it's like to be forgotten. And the best part? I'm not going to say a word. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. Let them sit with it. Let them wonder. Let them, for once, feel like an afterthought. Because if being the responsible one only means being used, then maybe I'm done being responsible. Maybe this year. I'm the problem. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. It took exactly 17 days before the silence cracked, not with a bang, not with a fight, but with a voicemail from my mother that began with her trademark wounded voice and the kind of opening line that's designed to make you feel small before you even hit play. Lena, sweetheart, I hate to bother you, but something strange happened this morning. That's how it always starts, with soft corners and emotional bait, with concern wrapped in guilt, and guilt tied in a bow of gentle manipulation. She said the landlord had left a notice on the front door, something about non-payment and pending action, and she was sure it was a mistake, surely a mix-up at the bank or some automatic withdrawal issue, because she just couldn't imagine that I would forget to take care of something so important. She ended with a sigh that landed like a hammer. I just don't know what we'd do if something were to go wrong, Lena. I didn't call her back. I didn't text. I didn't explain. Instead, I sat there on my couch, holding the phone in my hand and staring at the floor for what felt like an hour, not because I felt guilty, but because I didn't. And that realization hit me like cold air in a warm room. For the first time in a very long time, I felt calm. No racing heartbeat, no sweating palms, no urge to fix anything. Just peace. The next day, the calls increased, first 1, then 3, then 5. My father, usually silent in these matters, left me a voicemail too, his voice stiff and flat, reciting facts like he was reading from a courtroom transcript. He said the landlord had given them 10 days to settle the balance or face eviction. No hello. No warmth. Just numbers and consequences. But what struck me wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't say. He didn't ask me how I was doing. Didn't mention my birthday, now nearly 3 weeks behind us. Didn't acknowledge the silence. It was as if my existence was purely transactional, as if I were a bank account that suddenly stopped functioning and caused inconvenience. Still, I said nothing. I went to work, I met deadlines, I picked up groceries, I paid my own bills, and I waited. Because I knew what was coming next. The guilt wasn't working. The pressure wasn't working. So the next step would be escalation. It came on a Monday morning, gray, muggy, and already halfway ruined by a broken Keurig in the office kitchen. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through an inbox full of flagged reports, when the receptionist buzzed me with a quiet voice that suggested something awkward was unfolding in the lobby. She said, "Lena, there's an older couple here. They say they're your parents?" I froze. At first, I thought she must be joking. My parents have never once visited me at work. Not for a holiday, not for a promotion, not even that one time I landed the biggest contract of the quarter and got written up in the company newsletter. And now, after a decade of absence, they had shown up uninvited, unannounced, and clearly unhinged. I came down the stairs and saw them before they saw me. My mother was standing with her hands folded across her purse, that tragic look already plastered across her face, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. My father, red-faced and sweating slightly under the collar of his too-thick wool coat, was pacing. The receptionist kept stealing glances between them and me like she wanted to disappear. When my mom finally spotted me, her whole face transformed, eyebrows lifted, lips curled into a performative smile, the kind meant for church gatherings and public sympathy. "Lena," she said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, "we were just so worried. We thought maybe something happened to you, sweetie. We didn't know what else to do." I didn't hug her. I didn't smile. I just asked them to step outside with me. We stood under the awning, the air heavy with humidity and tension, and I finally asked them, directly and without hesitation, "What are you doing here?" And that's when the script flipped. My mother's tears came fast, her voice cracking as she spoke of betrayal, of abandonment, of the stress this had caused. My father, standing behind her like some warped version of a moral witness, chimed in with sharp words about duty and responsibility and how they'd always supported me when I needed it. I laughed. Out loud. Not because any of it was funny, but because the sheer audacity of it all, the rewriting of history, the complete erasure of all the years I paid their bills without complaint, of all the birthdays they forgot, of every sacrifice I made quietly and alone, was just so absurd that laughter felt like the only sane response. "I paid your rent for 9 years," I said, slowly and without raising my voice. 9 years, without a single late payment. And not once, did either of you remember my birthday. You took my help, my money, my silence, and you gave nothing back but expectations. So now, I've decided to stop. That's all. You're adults. You can figure it out." My mother blinked at me like I'd slapped her. My father stepped forward like he wanted to say something, but then didn't. And for a moment, the street was quiet except for the sound of cars passing in the distance. Later that evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and my phone face down on the table, I noticed a folded note wedged under my windshield wiper. I opened it without thinking, and inside, scrawled in Eli's messy handwriting, were just 6 words: "You didn't have to go nuclear." I stared at that paper for a long time, my fingers crumpling the edge of it. Because that note, it told me everything. He knew. He knew they'd forgotten me. He knew they took from me. And yet, he didn't speak up, didn't call, didn't even send a damn message on my birthday. But now that I'd flipped the script, now that I'd stopped being the good daughter, the responsible one, suddenly I was the problem? So tell me this, when does self-respect become selfishness? At what point does choosing peace for yourself mean you've burned down the village? Because I didn't scream. I didn't post about them online. I didn't drag their names through the mud. I just quietly closed the tab on their lives. And they lost their minds. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because if you think guilt is their best weapon, wait until you see what they try next. I didn't think they'd come back. I thought that their little performance outside my building, the tears, the wounded expressions, the implication that I had somehow become the villain in their tidy little story, would be enough drama for one generation. I genuinely believed that once I didn't fold under the pressure of their disappointment, they'd retreat to whatever narrative helped them sleep at night. The one where they were the good parents and I was the ungrateful daughter who lost her way somewhere between self-reliance and cruelty. But I had clearly underestimated just how deep their entitlement ran and just how unwilling they were to sit with discomfort that wasn't carefully curated or easily deflected. Because 5 days later, they returned. Not to my home this time. Not with a text or another voicemail. They came straight into the lion's den, my workplace, walking through the double-glass doors of my office building like they had every right to be there, like this was just another stop on their daily routine, like barging into my life uninvited was still something they believed they were entitled to do. It was just after 11 on a Thursday, one of those days that feels like it's crawling toward the weekend with heavy limbs and no sense of urgency, and I was buried in quarterly risk reports with 2 Zoom calls lined up and a headache building behind my eyes. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom with a hesitant tone that immediately sent a chill through my spine. "Lena," she said, "your parents are here, again." That pause between the words parents and again was telling. She remembered the last visit. Everyone did. It had become office folklore by that point, the time Lena's mom cried in the lobby and accused her of elder abuse. I had hoped the story would die out. But now here they were again, ready to pour gasoline on whatever remained of my professional dignity. When I stepped out of the elevator and turned the corner toward reception, I saw them instantly. My mother seated on one of the beige lobby chairs like it was her throne, lips pressed together in a way that suggested suffering and strength. Hands clutched in her lap as if preparing for a prayer or a courtroom plea. My father was standing, pacing just like before, only this time he held a manila envelope in his hand, which he tapped against his thigh in nervous, erratic patterns. Their presence felt like a shadow cast over the room, and the other employees sitting nearby did their best not to stare, though everyone was clearly eavesdropping. I didn't greet them. I didn't even slow my pace. I simply said, without breaking stride, "Let's go outside," and walked toward the exit. They followed me out, my mother sighing loudly enough for someone inside to hear, my father adjusting his glasses like he was stepping into a deposition. Once we were under the awning again, this cursed neutral ground between confrontation and civility, I turned to face them, crossing my arms, not out of defensiveness, but because I knew I needed a physical barrier, something to remind myself not to reach out, not to soften. My mother started in immediately, no pleasantries, no pretense. "We spoke to a lawyer," she said, as though it were a threat and a confession all in one. I didn't respond. I waited. My father handed me the envelope and said, "We've documented all the payments, all the years you paid, and the fact that there was no formal agreement in place. You can't just stop without warning, Lena. You left us vulnerable." Vulnerable. That word echoed in my head like a bad song. The same word they used every time Eli got into trouble, every time they excused bad behavior or rationalized favoritism. Vulnerable. As if I had pushed them off a cliff rather than simply stepping back from the edge I had been holding them over for years. I didn't take the envelope. I didn't need to. I already knew what was in it, printouts of bank statements, maybe a timeline scribbled in my dad's obsessive handwriting, perhaps even a drafted email to a judge that would never be sent. The point wasn't legal action. The point was power. They were trying to reclaim control, to reframe the story so that I was the aggressor, and they were the ones left behind by an unfeeling daughter who'd suddenly decided to sever ties without reason. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable, and then I said, slowly and with intention, "There's no law that says I have to keep being used." My mother's face twisted at the word used like I had spatted at her, but I didn't flinch. "I paid because I wanted to help, because I believed you needed it, because I thought maybe, just maybe, it was a way to show you I still mattered to you. But it turns out, you didn't need the help, not really. You needed control. You needed to remind me that I owed you something. And you used guilt to keep the leash tight." My father interrupted, voice raised just slightly, "You're being dramatic. This isn't about control, it's about stability. We've always supported each other." I cut him off. "No. You've always supported Eli. You gave him chance after chance, bailed him out, flew him to Europe, covered his lies, and made excuses for his failures. I've been the fallback plan. The wallet. The help. But I'm not doing it anymore." My mother's voice cracked then, her mask faltering just enough to show the anger underneath. "We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head." I stared at her for a long moment before replying, "That's what parents are supposed to do. That's not a debt I carry for life." They didn't have a response to that. They just stood there, quiet now, with the envelope dangling from my father's hand like a limp threat. I walked away, back inside, back into the air conditioning and fluorescent lights, and the distant hum of printers and typing. And as the doors closed behind me, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a hollow calm that settled into my bones like cold water. I knew this wouldn't be the end. They weren't the kind of people to surrender quietly. But I also knew I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had said the things that can't be unsaid. That night, when I got home, there was another note taped to my door. This one wasn't from my parents. It was from Eli. All it said was, "You always had to make everything harder than it needed to be." I stood there in the hallway for a full minute, holding that paper in my hands, the words sinking in like poison. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel forgotten, I felt targeted. And something in me started to turn. Because if they thought this was me being difficult, they hadn't seen anything yet. There's something about being accused of cruelty by the very people who have twisted your kindness into currency for years that makes you question not only your memories, but your own sense of reality. As if the past you lived and the past they remember are two entirely different stories told in parallel, never overlapping, never acknowledged. After the office ambush, I stopped taking their calls entirely, and within days, the silence became its own battlefield, one where guilt sat on one side like a ticking bomb and rage simmered on the other, slow but constant, refusing to die out. I wasn't sleeping well, not because I was second-guessing my decision, but because the weight of their narrative, this carefully constructed version of events in which I had abandoned them like some cold-hearted stranger, was starting to spread. Like mold on untouched bread, infecting the people around me who hadn't been there to witness the slow erosion of respect and the constant micro-abandonments that led me to this breaking point. It started with a message from my aunt, my mother's younger sister who hadn't spoken to me in nearly 3 years, suddenly resurfacing to say how shocked and disappointed she was to hear what I'd done. As if cutting off rent payments was an act of violence rather than a desperate reclaiming of boundaries. Then came the texts from distant cousins, the polite but condescending kind that reeked of passive judgment. Just checking in, heard things were tense, hope you're okay. And then, of course, the GoFundMe. Oh, the GoFundMe. It was a Sunday evening, and I was halfway through folding laundry when Trisha, who'd remained quiet throughout most of this ordeal, but still checked in from time to time with that cautious, almost maternal concern she specialized in, sent me a single link without comment. I clicked it, not expecting much, maybe a news article or some meme she thought would lighten the mood, but instead, I was staring at a crowdfunding page titled, "Help Our Parents Stay in Their Home, Unjustly Cut Off by Their Daughter." My heart didn't drop. It didn't race. It just stopped. The way a person freezes when they walk into a room and find everything rearranged, every familiar piece replaced by a version that makes them feel like an intruder in their own story. The page was filled with sentimental language, photos of my parents in front of the apartment complex, smiling despite their pain, and a 3-paragraph sob story written in Eli's unmistakable voice, the kind of polished manipulation he had mastered by the time he was 12. It told of financial hardship, of betrayal, of how their eldest daughter, who had once promised to care for them, had now turned her back without explanation, leaving them facing eviction at a vulnerable age. There was no mention of birthdays forgotten. No mention of rent paid for nearly a decade. No mention of Eli's Paris trip. No mention of the stolen credit, the manipulation, the endless emotional neglect. And what burned me most wasn't the lies, it was the comments. Names I recognized from family barbecues and holiday cards leaving messages like, "You raised such a wonderful son. Don't let one bad apple bring you down." People donating $20, $50, even $100 with notes that praised their resilience and strength. Some of them even mentioned me by name, not kindly. One read, "Shame on her. A real daughter wouldn't do this. A real daughter." As if biology bound me to servitude, as if my worth as a human being could be measured in checks cleared and phone calls returned despite being met with silence and disdain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't write a rebuttal, though I fantasized about it, about typing out every receipt, every forgotten birthday, every manipulation, and pasting it right there for everyone to read. I thought about naming names, tagging donors, posting photos of their Paris vacation, the receipts for Eli's bail, the overdraft notice from when I paid their electric bill on the same day I got a root canal and couldn't afford the pain meds after. But I didn't. I sat with it, with the rage, with the indignation, with the heartbreaking clarity that came when I finally accepted that my family had never seen me as a person, but as a resource. Still, I knew something had to be done. I couldn't let this narrative spread unchallenged, not because I cared about reputation, but because I needed the truth to exist somewhere, even if only in whispers, even if only in the corners of a digital world so easily manipulated. So I pulled out the file. The one I'd kept hidden in a folder labeled taxes on my hard drive, because if you want someone to leave something alone, you name it after something boring. Inside were scanned bank statements, screenshots of text messages, Email confirmations from my parents using my account for online purchases, proof of over 10 years of support. And most damning of all, an email thread from 3 years ago where my mother had written, "Just use Lena's credit card. She won't notice." Sent to Eli. Forwarded to me by mistake. I had kept it all, not because I planned to use it, but because somewhere deep down I knew this moment would come. I didn't post it publicly. That would have been too easy, too fast, and I didn't want revenge to come in the form of a comment war. Instead, I sent it. Quietly. To each of the top donors listed on the GoFundMe page. No commentary. No threats. Just attachments. Let them draw their own conclusions. Let them feel the discomfort of complicity. 2 days later, the fundraiser was taken down. No explanation. No apology. Just gone. And with it, the silence returned. No calls. No messages. Not from my parents. Not from Eli. Not from any of the family who had so quickly vilified me. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. Because the truth is, when you burn a bridge that connects you to pain, you don't dance in the glow, you stand there, on the edge of your own island, and you ask yourself if the isolation you've gained is worth the dignity you reclaimed. And just when I thought the storm had passed, just when I had begun to breathe again, there was a knock at my door. And standing there, unshaven, eyes tired but unreadable, holding nothing in his hands, was Eli. What he said next didn't just change how I saw my family. It changed how I saw myself. And after that, there really was no going back. He didn't knock again. Just stood there, silently, as if the weight of everything unsaid was balancing on his shoulders, pulling them downward until his spine curled slightly and his mouth, usually cocked in a grin or shaped into a rehearsed apology, remained shut for what was possibly the longest stretch of silence I had ever witnessed from him. Eli was always the talker, the charmer, the smooth-handed magician who distracted you with sentiment while stealing logic right out of your back pocket. But that night, he was still, his eyes searching mine not for forgiveness, not even understanding, but perhaps permission to begin whatever twisted version of the truth he had brought to my door like a poisoned offering wrapped in sincerity. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require a welcome mat. They demand entry like smoke through the cracks, and he knew he had it the moment I didn't slam the door in his face. "I shouldn't have written that note," he said at last, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, no performance, no edge, just raw breath and hesitation, like he wasn't sure whether to confess or retreat. I was angry, he continued, his gaze falling to the floor between us, but mostly I was scared. "They're not okay. They're unraveling. You knew they would." I crossed my arms, not for protection, but to keep my hands from trembling with the rage that had evolved, matured even, into something denser, heavier, no longer made of sparks and flames, but of molten grief and exhausted finality. "They unraveled themselves," I said, and I meant it. "They've been pulling their own threads for years." Eli nodded, almost imperceptibly, like he agreed, but didn't have the strength to admit it out loud. "Mom's been calling everyone," he said after a moment. "Friends from church, old neighbors, people she hasn't spoken to in decades. Telling them you've cut her off emotionally, that you're having some kind of breakdown. She doesn't even mention the rent anymore. It's all about your coldness." He looked up at me then, and for a second, I saw something terrifying in his eyes, not fear, not guilt, but pity. And not for himself. For me. I leaned against the doorframe, exhausted from years, not days, of conversations like this, of being the one who holds the weight, spins the plates, and still gets blamed when something crashes. "So, what are you here for, Eli?" I asked. "To defend them again? To play the messenger? Or is there some new guilt trip you've been assigned to deliver because the old ones aren't working?" He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood a little straighter, took a breath so deep I could hear it stretch the silence, and said something I'll never forget, something so calmly cruel and undeniably true that it cracked open everything I thought I'd buried. "You were never the favorite, Lena. You were the replacement." I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stared at him, willing the words to rearrange themselves into something less shattering, less final, but they stayed exactly as they were, bare and cold, laid out on the doorstep like bones. He stepped forward, slowly, the weight of what he'd said dragging his feet like he wasn't sure if he was offering freedom or destruction. "You know she lost a daughter before you," he said, and my blood turned to ice, because I didn't know. I'd heard whispers once when I was a child, a mention of a baby that didn't make it, but no one ever said her name. No one ever explained. "You were born 2 years after," he continued. "Dad never talked about it. Mom, well, she made you her project. You were never a child to her, not really. You were a second chance. But not the kind that gets loved. The kind that gets managed." I felt the world tilt then, not dramatically, not like a fall, but like the floor had shifted 2 degrees and everything I had known had to be recalculated. I had spent my life interpreting their behavior through the lens of imbalance, of favoritism, of neglect born from comparison, but now I saw it, clear and brutal, that I had never been a daughter in the way Eli had. I had been a symbol, a placeholder, an effort to correct a cosmic mistake that wasn't mine to fix. Eli didn't stay long after that. He didn't cry, didn't apologize, didn't ask for anything. He simply said, "I think you were always right to pull away. I just didn't want to admit it. Because if you stop being the glue, then I have to start being something real." And then he walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the sky shift from dark to blue to gray, and I thought about all the roles I had played for them: caretaker, peacekeeper, financier, disappointment, and how none of them had anything to do with being a daughter. I remembered every silent birthday, every moment I had convinced myself that loving them unconditionally was noble, that being needed was the same as being wanted. And I felt something in me let go, not with anger, not with grief, but with clarity. The next morning, I made a decision. I wrote a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. I told them I wished them well. I told them I hoped they found what they were looking for. And I told them I would no longer be part of their story, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood that continuing to play a role in someone else's performance doesn't make it your play. Then I folded it, stamped it, and dropped it in the mailbox. Later that day, I got a call from Ted. Yes, that Ted, the man I nearly married a decade ago before I let responsibility swallow romance. He'd seen the GoFundMe debacle, heard through someone in our old circle that I'd finally drawn the line, and he just wanted to check in, maybe grab coffee, maybe talk. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said maybe, and it was the first maybe I'd allowed in years. Because I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll regret the silence I chose. I don't know if the peace I'm building will hold. I don't know if Eli will find his way, or if my parents will ever stop rewriting history. But I do know this. I'm no longer living for their version of the truth. And maybe that's not a happy ending. But it's mine.